4 people in their 20s went missing off the coast of Poseong, South Korea, and tragically, they were later found dead, floating in the ocean. Signs of foul play were discovered on the victims. In what seemed to be a quiet, rural seaside town, the deaths of these 4 people led to a chilling discovery. The person suspected of this string of murders is a seemingly ordinary 70-year-old fisherman. It's hard to make sense of it all. He claimed that all he wanted was to touch the female victim's breasts, as if that were his only intention. But what really happened that day? And who is he, truly? Today, let's talk about the Poseong fisherman murder case. This case started with a single missing person report. The caller said that 2 university students, Chu and Kim, had gone missing after going on a trip together. After 2 days with no contact, the police checked their phone records and found that Chu had made 4 calls, the last one being to 119, the emergency number. The call lasted only about 5 or 6 seconds. Yes, this is 119. But there was too much noise to hear properly, making the conversation almost impossible. The call kept getting cut off. They called again and again, but there was no real conversation. However, during the 4th call, something unusual could be heard. The sounds were faint, almost mechanical, mixed with some sort of indistinct human voices buried under the noise. But this call was also soon cut off. Whose voice could it have been? When the police traced the call, it came from the middle of the ocean. They started searching the sea, focusing on the boats that had recently left the area. During this time, investigators found security footage from a convenience store, which showed Chu and Kim. The street they were walking on was the only path to the sea. More footage from a rooftop CCTV camera confirmed that they were headed towards the ocean just before they disappeared. Moments later, someone approached them, and right after that, the 119 calls began. 3 days later, the couple's bodies were found floating in the sea. Kim's body clearly showed signs of foul play. He had fractures on his upper arm and stomach area, as well as a broken ankle. It was evident he had been murdered. Who could have done this, and why? Less than a month after this, another victim was found at sea. A 20-year-old woman named Cho, along with her friend, An. They had visited the area during the Chuseok holiday, only to meet the same tragic fate. The key breakthrough came from a couple who had borrowed a phone from Cho just before she died. On their way home, they received a disturbing text from Cho, saying she was trapped on a boat and pleading for help. The couple immediately contacted the police and tried calling her several times, but there was no reply. There weren't many fishing boats out that day because of the holiday, so the police began tracking down the few that were. One of them belonged to a man named Oh Jong-gun, who had been operating an unregistered boat, evading the law for years. When the police searched his boat, they found crucial evidence. They discovered An's credit card, along with a hair tie and strands of long hair believed to belong to one of the victims. The police immediately arrested Oh as the prime suspect. He was an old man in his 70s. Investigators never imagined a 70-year-old man could be behind such a crime. It was shocking. He looked so frail and elderly. It was hard to believe someone like him could be capable of such horrific acts. When the police arrested Oh, he initially denied the charges, claiming that An had fallen into the sea while trying to relieve herself, and that Cho had drowned while attempting to save her. He also denied responsibility for the earlier murders of the 2 university students, insisting that high waves had caused both Kim and Chu to fall into the sea, and that he had been unable to save them. But 2 months after the crime, a surprising discovery was made: a digital camera. Chu's digital camera was found tangled in another fisherman's net, along with contents of her emergency call to 119. After painstaking efforts to recover the data, the camera revealed crucial evidence, capturing everything from the moment the students boarded the boat to just before the crime. The footage also showed the elderly fisherman, whom the victims had trusted, standing with his back to the camera. Also, during Chu's fourth call to emergency services, investigators identified O's voice caught on tape, asking, "Who are you calling?" Here's what really happened that fateful afternoon. On August 31st, Kim and Chu, two university students, met O at a dock in Hwacheonmyeon, Bosong County. They were on a trip together when O, in a friendly manner, offered to take them out to the sea on a small squid fishing boat. With no reason to doubt him, they hopped on board. About 30 minutes into the trip, O's true intentions surfaced. He stopped the boat, quietly crept up behind the couple, and, without warning, grabbed Kim and shoved him into the water. As Kim desperately tried to pull himself back onto the boat, O viciously attacked him with a long fishing tool with a hook. He struck Kim repeatedly, targeting his head and legs, leaving Kim with no chance to defend himself. Tragically, Kim drowned from the relentless assault. As Chu watched in terror, frozen by the horror unfolding before her eyes, O turned his attention toward her. He approached, reached out his hand, and said, "Let me touch your breasts." Chu, terrified, slapped his hand away and resisted as best she could. But O was relentless. He grabbed her by the chest and legs and forcefully shoved her into the water. Desperate to survive, Chu tried to swim back to the boat, but every time she got close, O used the same tool to push her away, making sure she couldn't climb back aboard. Chu's strength gave out, and she drowned, unable to escape his violent attack. Less than a month later, on the morning of September 25th, O struck again. Around 11:30 a.m., he met two women, 23-year-old An, a nurse, and 24-year-old Cho, an office worker, at a nearby dock. The women, who lived in Incheon and Siheung, were on a trip to celebrate the Chuseok holiday. O, once again in a friendly manner, offered to take them out to sea for a tour. Given his age, they likely didn't see him as a threat and agreed to the boat ride. After showing them around, O steered the boat farther out to sea and, in the afternoon, came to a stop in open water. He then approached An and asked, "Can I touch her breasts?" as he reached out to grope her. An immediately slapped his hand away and resisted, with Cho stepping in to help hold him back. During the struggle, O became violent. He forcefully pushed An, causing her to slam against the deck and cabin of the boat before shoving her overboard into the sea. He then turned on Cho, strangling her before shoving her into the cabin and ultimately throwing her into the water as well. When An tried to climb back onto the boat, O used the same fishing tool to swing at her, preventing her from getting back aboard. Both women tragically lost their lives in the attack. During questioning, he maintained a rigid posture, saying, "I did nothing wrong. There's no truth to any of this." The police tried their last resort, showing him the victim's photos, hoping to appeal to his conscience, but it had no effect. He showed no emotion. His face didn't change color. He just shrugged and said, "It happens." He even went as far as to blame the victims, stating they were at fault for asking to be taken out on the boat in the first place. In both cases, O claimed the victims had asked him for a ride on his boat. However, the police noticed a significant detail in the second crime. O changed the pickup location for the two women. Instead of using the main dock where people were around, he took them to a more isolated area. He instructed the women to wait at a secluded dock far from prying eyes before taking them out to sea. This suggests that the crime was likely premeditated. Despite the mounting evidence against him, Oh continued to give ridiculous excuses, insisting that the victims were to blame because they hadn't paid for the boat ride. In his twisted view, they had put him in a tough spot, and he claimed that their actions were the reason he was in trouble. Even after their deaths, Mr. O portrayed himself as the true victim, saying that while they were gone, he was the one left behind to suffer. He complained that society was now condemning him and that he was in pain because of what had happened, completely shifting the blame onto the victims. O's remarks made it clear that he was entirely self-centered. He showed no empathy for the lives he had taken or for the pain he had caused their families. It was as if he couldn't grasp the seriousness of his own actions. This tendency to shift blame onto the victims rather than taking responsibility for his actions is often seen in serial killers. It's one of the common characteristics among those who commit multiple murders, projecting their guilt onto others instead of facing their own culpability. Detective Kwon Il-yong mentioned that when he met Oh, the suspect in this case, he felt the same way as when he encountered Chung Nam-gyu, the infamous serial killer also known as the pleasure killer. Chung had once said that he targeted homes in poor neighborhoods because they lacked security systems like CCTV, making it easier for him to break in. He even blamed the residents for not installing such systems, showing his extreme self-centeredness and lack of guilt. This kind of detached, emotionless attitude is what aligns with the traits of a psychopath. Their crimes are not just about the acts of violence, but also the complete lack of empathy or remorse for the victims. They rationalize their actions by projecting blame onto others. O's crime motivations seem to follow a similar path. He initially claimed his intention was sexual assault, but the extreme violence and eventual murders show a much darker mindset. His actions go beyond the typical criminal intent in cases of sexual assault. He targeted the male victim first, drowning him to eliminate any obstacles before turning his attention to female victims. Even though he claims the acts were impulsive, experts believe his murders were premeditated from the start. After the crime, O's demeanor was telling. Serial killers are often known for their ability to remain calm and collected after committing horrific acts. O was no different. He returned home, ate meals as usual, and acted as if nothing had happened. Even his wife, who lived with him, had no idea of the brutal murders he had committed. She couldn't imagine that her husband was capable of such acts. He continued his daily routines, buying ice every 3 days to preserve the fish he caught. There was nothing in his behavior to suggest guilt or remorse, a fact that still chills those who knew him. This led investigators to believe that after the first murder, O spent time carefully planning the second. Once his initial excitement subsided, he took his time and executed his next crime in a similar fashion, this time targeting his next 2 victims. Mr. O, a 70-year-old fisherman, had spent most of his life in a small coastal village, but despite his long presence in the community, few truly knew him. He had no close friends and rarely spoke to those around him. Even people who interacted with him regularly, such as the man who sold him ice every 3 days for over 4 years, barely exchanged words with him. O had been someone who quietly drifted through the village, leaving little impression on those around him. One person who grew up with him recalled that O never went to school and spent most of his childhood on a boat, adding that he didn't even know his mother well. His half-siblings had attended school, but O grew up isolated and without much family support. Despite this difficult upbringing, O eventually got married, which seemed to provide some stability in his life. Marriage and family, experts say, can sometimes act as a control mechanism, preventing individuals with antisocial tendencies like psychopaths from engaging in extreme criminal behavior. Oh's long-standing marriage may have been one reason he managed to avoid any major incidents until this shocking case unfolded. But things began to unravel as Oh's family life fell apart. Oh became more isolated, spending more time on his boat and less time with his family. He would often sleep on the boat and return home only to sleep briefly before leaving again. Sometimes he wouldn't even return home at all, which indicated a growing separation from his family and his community. The once stable family ties began to break down, and his connection with his loved ones weakened. Over time, Oh became more and more isolated, a trait commonly seen in serial killers. Like many others who follow a similar path, his social isolation may have fueled the darkness within him, pushing him toward his violent actions. As Oh became more isolated from his family and society, the inner issues he had buried for so long started to surface. It was like he was slipping deeper into a world of his own, where no one could control him or hold him accountable. Experts believe that aging may have made things worse, acting as a trigger for his already unstable personality. Psychopaths are known to have issues with their frontal lobes, the part of the brain that helps control aggression and violent impulses. In Oh's case, as he aged, this ability to regulate his behavior likely weakened even more. Aging, combined with his antisocial traits, might have made it harder for him to manage impulses, pushing him toward more extreme actions. For Oh, the boat wasn't just a workplace or a place to sleep. It was his escape, his sanctuary. Out on the water, cut off from the world on land, Oh created his own private kingdom, where he could be the ruler. This became even more evident when police took him back to the boat for a crime scene reenactment. Instead of simply following instructions, Oh took control of the entire situation. He insisted on correcting every little detail, like where the victim was sitting or how certain objects were placed. For him, those small things mattered more than the crime itself. It was as if the boat was the only place where he had complete dominance, where he could fully express himself without interference. In his mind, everything had to be just right, according to his rules. The real turning point came when his sense of control was challenged. When the young women resisted his advances, it wasn't just about them saying no. It was a direct challenge to the authority he felt he had on his boat. Their rejection shattered the control he thought he had, and he lashed out violently, revealing just how deeply disturbed he truly was. Although Oh's IQ was measured at 73, the court ruled that this was likely due to his old age and lack of formal education. He had dropped out of school in second grade. The court found no significant mental impairments affecting his perception or memory. Despite his small stature, as he was 165 centimeters at the time, and being 70 years old by Korean age, he was physically strong, having worked as a fisherman for many years, which kept him in good shape, comparable to that of a younger person. Additionally, the court noted that being on a boat worked in Oh's favor. Boats are easily affected by waves and movement, making it difficult for someone inexperienced to maintain balance or exert force. This gave Oh a clear advantage, allowing him to overpower the younger victims in his familiar environment. Oh was convicted of multiple murders and other charges, receiving a death sentence in both the first trial and subsequent appeals, all the way to the Supreme Court. In March 2010, the Gwangju High Court dismissed Oh's appeal. The court highlighted that Oh had lured his second set of victims to a more secluded dock with the intent to sexually assault them, resulting in the deaths of 2 young innocent lives. The court also stated that Oh showed no remorse, and there was no hope for rehabilitation or reintegration into society. In June of that same year, the Supreme Court upheld the death sentence. Oh, now around 85 years old, is the oldest inmate on death row in South Korea. In 2008, it was reported that his eldest son had taken his own life. The son had been living away from the village, but after hearing about his father's crimes, he couldn't handle the shame and ended himself. Word spread quickly that he had been struggling with the burden of his father's actions. Not long after, Oh's wife quietly left the village as well, moving to Seoul to live with her daughter, who ran a restaurant. Of Oh's 2 sons and 5 daughters, only 1 daughter had stayed in Posong, but after everything happened, she made it clear she wanted nothing to do with him. The entire family had essentially disowned Oh, leaving him to face the consequences of his own actions. When informed about his eldest son's tragic death, he reportedly asked, "Why? What happened to my son?" which showed his continued detachment from the realities of his actions and their consequences. This case shows how unchecked isolation, lack of accountability, and unresolved psychological issues can lead to devastating consequences. It is a reminder to stay mindful and look out for those around us. Our sincere condolences go out to the victims and their loved ones, and we hope they've found some peace in the aftermath of this tragedy. That is all for today. Thanks for watching.